The lobby clock ticked louder than it should have. My bags were packed, resting by my side. Guests strolled in, laughing about dinner plans. None of them had the faintest clue. My name is Derek Lawson. For nearly a decade, I worked as an executive chef for Crescent Shores International, one of the biggest all-inclusive hotel chains in America. My job wasn't just cooking. It was order, discipline, and survival. I managed kitchens that fed hundreds, sometimes thousands of guests a night. I was the kind of man who thrived in chaos, the one they called when things fell apart. And that's how I ended up here, 3,000 miles away from everything I knew, abandoned in a place I never wanted to be. That day, I wasn't thinking about recipes or seasoning. I wasn't worried about food safety inspections or banquet orders. What sat heavy in my chest was betrayal. A promise had been made, one that carried me across the country, away from family, away from home. And that promise had been broken. The strange thing about betrayal is it doesn't explode all at once. It seeps. It lingers. It shapes your choices until the moment you decide you've had enough. By 4:36 p.m., my decision was already sealed. The kitchen looked alive, pots set on burners, onions glistening under foil, garlic sizzling just enough to trick the air. But it was a ghost kitchen, staged for a dinner that would never come. 750 guests were expecting a meal that night. They would not get one. I can still see the panic in his eyes. My manager rushing out into the lobby, sweat streaking down his shirt, his voice shaking as he warned me what would happen if I left. He said I'd never work for the company again. I didn't argue. I just laughed, shook his hand, and walked out. But what led to that moment? The quiet ride to the airport, the chaos left behind, the silence that followed, wasn't about food. It was about a promise broken, and the price that had to be paid. And if you've ever been left stranded, betrayed by someone who claimed to have your back, you'll understand why I had to leave behind my own surprise package. But to understand how I got there, you need to know how it all began. It was February 12, 2001, a Monday night, 8:15 p.m. The kitchen was alive the way only a hotel kitchen can be. Knives clattering against cutting boards, pans hissing as oil met steel, the rush of orders being shouted from one end to the other. The air carried the sharpness of onions, the sweetness of roasted peppers, and the heat of 100 burners working overtime. I was in my zone, sleeves rolled up, chef's coat pressed white, running the line with the precision of a soldier. That's who I was, Derek Lawson, 32 years old, an executive chef for Crescent Shores International, the hotel chain people paid thousands just to say they stayed at. To outsiders, it was glamour. To me, it was discipline, timing, control. But that night, in the middle of dinner service, as I was watching over plates for a group of diplomats in the main dining room, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, and there he was, one of the regional managers. His face wasn't angry. It wasn't even hurried. It was cold. He leaned in close so the rest of the staff couldn't hear, and said 6 words that knocked the rhythm out of me. "Pack your bags. You're being moved." At first, I thought he was joking. Nobody just moves a chef in the middle of a high-season rush. But his stare told me otherwise. He laid it out plain. The company was having a crisis at another property, 3,000 miles away, and they needed me to fix it. No discussion, no warning. He said, "If you can't take it, Derek, we'll have to let you go." Just like that. All those years of loyalty, of sweating over stoves, of covering shifts when others quit mid-service, reduced to an ultimatum between obedience and unemployment. I remember standing there, spatula still in my hand, the smell of seared garlic in the air, and my chest felt heavy. It wasn't the distance that hit me. It was the disregard. Like I was another piece of equipment, like a pan you pack up and send across the country when it's needed. And yet, in that same breath, a different part of me knew that walking away wasn't in my blood. My mother raised me in New Orleans to believe a man keeps going, no matter how unfair the load. She used to say, "Your word is your spine. Once it bends, you break." So I swallowed the anger, kept my voice steady, and I bargained. If I was going to uproot my life, step into someone else's storm, I needed something in return. I told them I'd fix the labor issue, get the kitchen running clean, and in exchange, when the fire was out, I'd get to choose my next hotel, anywhere I wanted in the chain. They hesitated, but I made it clear that was the only way I'd agree. A man's promise should mean something. They shook on it. That handshake became my lifeline. It was the string I clung to as I watched the dining room buzz that night, pretending like my whole world hadn't just shifted. I told myself that if I endured this, if I carried the burden without complaint, the reward would be freedom. I convinced myself that I could survive a desert of disappointment if it led me to a future I could finally choose. But what I didn't know then was that the very thing I trusted, an agreement sealed in words, would be the blade they'd use against me. I told myself I could endure anything if it meant I could choose my own future. I was wrong. When the plane touched down on the tarmac of Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, it was 7:42 a.m., April 16th, 2017. The desert sun was already unforgiving, pressing its heat against the glass windows before most of the city had even stirred awake. I stepped out with one suitcase, one chef's knife kit, and the weight of a deal I never wanted to make. Phoenix was nothing like New Orleans. The air was dry, stripped of the humidity that once carried the scent of gumbo simmering in neighbors' kitchens or the musk of wet pavement after a summer rain. Here, the streets looked wide but hollow, as though they were built for a people who never came. The desert had a way of making silence loud, and in that silence, I felt the ache of exile. The hotel they sent me to sat like a fortress in the middle of that emptiness, tall glass, reflective, trying too hard to convince the world it belonged. Inside, I found a kitchen unlike any I had known. No rhythm, no respect, no pulse. The staff were split down in visible lines. Dishwashers on one side, line cooks on another, pastry team avoiding everyone. No trust, no unity, just knives clattering against cutting boards, each sound sharper than the last. I had been sent here to fix it, but it felt less like leadership and more like punishment. At night, when the desert cooled and the city lights flickered weakly against the horizon, I would sit alone in my apartment. I would close my eyes and try to hear home. The brass horns from a street corner in Treme, the shuffling of feet on a back porch as neighbors traded stories, the smell of red beans and rice drifting through open windows on a Monday evening. Instead, I opened my eyes to sterile white walls and a microwave buzzing in place of a stove. This was exile, and the truth of it sank in slow. I had given up Sunday dinners with my mother, laughter with cousins who'd stop by unannounced, the familiar crooked sidewalks I knew better than my own scars, all for a promise. The promise that if I endured this, I would one day choose my own future. I remember those first weeks in Phoenix like a blur of heat and steel. The desert outside pressed down on me during the day, but it was nothing compared to the heat inside that kitchen. 12 burners going at once, ovens roaring, knives hitting boards in a frantic rhythm. It felt like stepping into a battlefield every morning. And in a way it was. I threw myself into the fire, because that's all I knew how to do. Long hours, sweat dripping down my back, fingers raw from chopping, and my mind locked on one thing: survival. Some of the staff looked at me like I was just another manager flown in to bark orders. Others wanted to test me, to see if I'd break under pressure. I could feel their doubt every time I gave an instruction, every time I corrected a plate. They weren't going to respect me just because I wore the title. I had to earn it, one dish at a time. One night, I'll never forget, the hotel had booked a massive event, 750 guests. A charity gala, the kind of night that could sink a kitchen if one thing went wrong. That evening, half the line cooks called out. A mix of excuses, maybe a bit of protest. Management panicked, but me? I tightened my apron, rolled up my sleeves, and told myself I'd carry it, no matter the cost. I ran every station. Sauté pans in my left hand, ladle in my right. Orders flying at me, so fast I stopped hearing words and just moved by instinct. My shirt was soaked through before the first course even left the line. At one point, a server came back shouting that the steak wasn't hot enough. I snatched it back, threw it under the broiler, plated it again, and sent it out with a glare that ended the argument. For 4 straight hours, I didn't breathe. I just worked. By the time the last dessert left the pass, my arms felt like lead, my legs like they were ready to give out. I leaned against the counter, chest heaving, and looked around at the staff. They were quiet, staring at me in a way they hadn't before. Not like a stranger, not like some outsider flown in to fix their problems, but like someone who had bled in the trenches beside them. That night changed everything. From then on, when I spoke, they listened. I had done what I was sent there to do. I fixed the labor issue. I turned chaos into order. I kept my word. And so, I went to management, walked into that office, still smelling of smoke and grease, and sat across from the man who had sent me 3,000 miles from home. I reminded him of the deal. I had upheld my end. I had earned the right to choose my future. But even as I spoke, I felt something inside me tighten. Because promises are easy to make in the cool air of an office. The question was, would they honor it now that the fire was put out? And that's when I began to understand. Proving yourself is one thing. Being granted what you deserve is another. They called me into the office like it was any other day. A clipboard in one hand, a corporate smile on the manager's face. But I knew before he opened his mouth that something was wrong. He leaned back in his chair and delivered the words with no hesitation. No stutter, no trace of guilt. You're too valuable here, Derek. We're keeping you. Just like that. As if the months of sacrifice, the sweat-soaked nights, the endless hours where I carried an entire kitchen on my back, meant nothing. As if my future was not mine to decide, but theirs to confiscate. I sat there, calm on the outside, but inside I was burning. My jaw tightened, but my voice didn't rise. I had learned long ago that fury, when visible, is a gift you hand to someone else. So I gave them nothing but silence. A nod, a steady look. But inside, something broke. In that moment, a memory returned uninvited. I was 12 years old again, standing in a one-room kitchen in New Orleans, the smell of red beans and rice filling the air. My mother's hands, rough from cleaning houses, gripped my shoulders. She told me then, in the plainest words, "Son, a man without his word is already ruined." She lived by that. She gave everything she had to raise me, and her word was the one thing she never betrayed. Now, years later, sitting in that sterile office, hearing a deal unravel in front of me, I realized betrayal was worse than a knife in the gut. A wound might heal, but this was rot spreading into the foundation of everything I believed in. I had honored my end. I had bled into their kitchens, rebuilt their staff, restored order where there had been chaos. I had proven myself beyond question, and the promise they dangled before me, the reward for my sacrifice, was snatched away with a smile. The insult wasn't just the broken deal. It was how casual it was, how little weight my trust seemed to carry. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed in that dry, air-conditioned apartment and stared at the wall, running through every decision that had brought me here. My hands still smelled of garlic and charred steak, but all I could think about was how small they had made me feel, like I was just a cog too useful to replace. They thought I would stay quiet. They thought discipline meant submission. They had no idea who I was. I began planning my next move, carefully, deliberately, not in rage, but in silence. Rage fades. Silence sharpens. I told myself, they will never see me beg, but they will one day understand what it means to break a promise to Derek Lawson. And as I folded my chef's jacket that night, I made a vow to myself in the dark. If their word meant nothing, then neither would mine. The next day, I went into the manager again. I remember standing in that manager's office, my apron still tied around my waist, sweat still clinging to my skin from the dinner rush, and telling them with a voice that didn't shake, "You've got 3 weeks. Fix this or I walk." No yelling, no begging, just a line drawn in stone. I knew what I was worth by then, and I wasn't about to let them treat me like a disposable knife in the drawer. They looked at me, offered the usual corporate smile, the kind that hides indifference behind polished teeth, and I walked out knowing the clock had already started. Week 1 passed in silence. I threw myself into the kitchen. Each order I plated as precise as if it were the last. The staff could feel something different in me. Calmer, sharper, heavier. I would look at the managers sometimes, waiting for them to call me into the office, but the only thing that came was paperwork, schedules, and more empty smiles. Silence has a way of speaking louder than words, and in that silence, I already knew what their answer was going to be. Week 2 came with half gestures. A brief conversation in the hallway, a nod that felt more like dismissal than promise. They spoke in riddles, phrases like "we're reviewing" and "still considering options." But I've been around long enough to know that corporate stalling is just another way of saying no. I went home each night more restless, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow in my apartment, listening to the hum of desert air through the thin walls, wondering if I was a fool for believing they'd keep their word. By the 3rd week, even the lies stopped coming. No calls, no meetings. I stopped waiting. The anger that had simmered quietly inside me hardened into something colder, sharper. This was resolve, slow, steady, patient. I moved differently in the kitchen. Every dish I finished, every staff meeting I led, felt like I was closing chapters, tying loose ends. I smiled more, not because I was happy, but because I knew I was finally in control. When that 3rd week ended, I didn't walk into the office to remind them of their promise. I didn't beg for recognition or clarity. I already knew. I told myself I had been a soldier long enough in someone else's war. And so I stopped waiting, and I started preparing for what came next, even if it meant burning everything I'd built to the ground. That night, I made up my mind. That night I decided that if they weren't going to honor their word, then I would force them to feel what betrayal tastes like. Planning revenge is not a loud thing. It is quiet, precise, almost delicate. Every move must be measured, every detail invisible until the curtain finally falls. That was the state of mind I carried into those last days, building my plan like a chef builds a dish, layering flavors until the balance is just right. I started with the staff. They were my shield, my witnesses, and my test of loyalty all at once. One by one, I let them know, take the day off, no questions asked, and when the phones ring, don't answer. Some were confused, others skeptical. But by then, I had earned their trust in sweat and long nights over boiling pots. They didn't challenge me. They followed. And with that, the foundation of the trick was set. Then came the stage. A kitchen is alive in ways outsiders never notice. Its hum, its rhythm, the constant clash of knives and pans, the scents that bleed into the air hours before a single plate ever leaves the pass. I needed to recreate that illusion, to build a lie so convincing that it would carry itself without a single body in the room. So I left bunches of rosemary and thyme floating in pans of water, like they had just been dropped in for sauces not yet finished. I set garlic cloves sizzling in shallow pools of oil, their fragrance leaking into every corner. I even laid out cutting boards dusted with herb stems and onion skins, as though the rush of prep had been in full swing only minutes earlier. To anyone stepping in, it would feel alive, bustling, on the edge of ready, when in truth, it was hollow, a ghost kitchen I had conjured from memory and smell. The weight of it pressed on me as I walked through the space alone. Every corner I staged carried a purpose. Every sound I mimicked in my head was part of the deception. I imagined managers walking through those doors, expecting the roar of service, the army of cooks firing on command, and instead finding nothing but silence disguised as labor. The chaos wouldn't come from what they saw, but from what they didn't. And I savored that image, the same way they had savored dangling promises in front of me. But it wasn't just about humiliation. It was about clarity. I wanted them to know that every bit of order they depended on, every seamless dinner they hosted, every satisfied guest, it had all been balanced on my back. Strip me of recognition, deny me what I earned, and the machine stopped. That was the message. As I walked the line that night, checking each pan, each surface, I kept asking myself, would I be able to follow through? Would I stand by and watch their empire stumble, knowing I had lit the match? That's the thing about revenge. It isn't just the plan, It's the courage to carry it to its end. I remember the exact weight of my bag that day. Heavier than usual, though it only carried my clothes. Maybe because it also carried my decision. At 4:30 sharp, I zipped it closed, straightened my jacket, and told myself, this was it. No speeches, no last-minute warnings, no regrets. Just action. The hallways were quiet, almost eerily so. Guests walked past me in their vacation clothes, sunburned from the Arizona heat, clutching brochures and half-empty cocktails. Some laughed too loudly. Some argued softly about dinner reservations, and all of them were blind to the storm about to land on their plates. They didn't see me as I walked past, just another face, another worker carrying his bag. But I knew I wasn't just walking out of a hotel. I was walking out a lie. I pressed the elevator button and listened to the hum as it carried me down. My chest should have been pounding, but it wasn't. My hands should have been trembling, but they weren't. My calmness felt strange, like it didn't belong to me. The chaos I had staged upstairs would soon erupt. Herbs soaking in pans of water, garlic sizzling low on burners, the scent of a feast without the feast itself. A deception built to trick until the very moment it collapsed. When the doors slid open, the lobby unfolded in front of me. Guests lounged in the cushioned chairs, flipping through newspapers, scrolling phones, sipping on iced teas. The air smelled faintly of chlorine and perfume. My ride was already waiting outside, headlights pointed at the revolving door. And then he appeared, my manager. His shirt clung to him with sweat, his eyes darting from the kitchen to me, back again, like a man realizing too late that the rope around his neck had been tightening for weeks. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He knew. I walked toward him slowly. He tried to block me, but even his body seemed too weak to hold ground. I extended my hand. He hesitated, then took it, his palm damp, his grip desperate. I smiled, not cruelly, but with the quiet certainty of a man finally free. "Thank you," I said, as if I were the one who owed him something. Then I laughed lightly, like this was just another day, just another shift ending. Behind his eyes, panic was clawing for the surface. He was already picturing the ballroom upstairs, 750 guests, chairs filling, servers wandering, no food to serve, no cooks in the kitchen. A hotel's reputation about to collapse before his eyes. He tried to scare me and said, "If you leave Derek, you're going to lose your job." I told him I stopped 3 weeks ago. I turned, stepped into the revolving door, and felt the warm desert air brush against my face. My heartbeat stayed steady. My bag didn't feel heavy anymore. He thought he owned me. That night, he learned different. I can still picture that evening like it happened yesterday. By the time the first guests began filing into the dining room, I was already gone, sitting in the back seat of a car that pulled away from the hotel like nothing was out of the ordinary. But I knew the storm was about to break. Word spread faster than anyone expected. Waiters looked for dishes that weren't ready. Runners peeked through swinging doors into a kitchen that was dead silent. They found only pots with floating herbs, a faint sizzle from garlic left on a low flame, and the unmistakable absence of every cook, every set of hands that made that massive dinner service possible. At first there was confusion, managers whispering, staff dialing numbers that went unanswered, their calls met with silence, just like I had instructed. Then came the panic, because 500, 600, 750 guests didn't care about excuses. They wanted plates, they wanted courses, they wanted promises kept. The dining room turned restless. Conversations rose into complaints, and complaints rose into anger. Guests in suits and gowns slammed napkins onto tables, demanding to know why their service was delayed. Some shouted at servers. Others stormed toward the front desk. The air that night wasn't filled with the aroma of food. It was thick with fury and embarrassment. Every passing minute cracked the hotel's reputation further, like glass shattering in slow motion. I imagined the manager's face when he realized it wasn't a delay. It was a collapse. He had told me once, in his smug, condescending tone, "If you ever walk out, you might as well consider yourself out of a job permanently." I remember the way he leaned back in his chair, confident I would never leave, confident I needed him more than he needed me. And I smiled, even back then, because I already knew the truth. The night I walked out, I wasn't losing a job. I had already stopped working for him in my heart weeks earlier. The only thing left was for him to understand it. By the time guests began leaving in waves, their complaints echoing through the lobby, the financial damage was sealed. A night that should have been filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and fine dining became a catastrophe that would be talked about in boardrooms and among investors for years. For the manager, it wasn't just a bad night. It was the night his career ended. The phone calls he received that evening weren't apologies. They were ultimatums. His reputation, once tied to precision and luxury, was gone in a single stroke. And me? I sat at a distance, watching lights flicker through hotel windows, picturing the scramble, the desperation, the collapse of a man who thought he held all the cards. I thought about broken promises, about the arrogance that made him believe words carried no weight, about how betrayal never stays hidden. It always resurfaces. He wanted me to bend, to stay quiet, to endure. Instead, I showed him what happened when trust snapped. That night, one man's broken word set off a chain reaction that ruined everything he'd built. And as I looked out into the night, calm, steady, removed from the chaos, I asked myself the same question I ask you now. Was this justice or destruction?